Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 735. I start off with d4. My opponent went g6. Pretty unusual move here. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The sixth most popular choice. Although you see it's still kind of up there in numbers compared to these less reputable ways of playing. But the big two, of course, are knight f6 or d5. Anyway, g6 is kind of interesting, but it lets white build up a big center. If you look at this position with the chess engine, it starts to give white a big advantage already. But of course, it's a long game and nothing is certain. I played pretty well for the first part of the game. Get the knight out, and either knight move is probably okay here, but knight f3 makes sense. You know, lending a little more support to this dark squared diagonal, where obviously black has set his eyes on getting some counterplay along that. Then he goes with a very rare move, d5. The normal way to continue here is with d6. d6 is a very flexible move because it sets up the possibility of later c5 or e5. So, and it's consistent with the bishop development. It's continuing to play with the dark squares, and at the same time it opens up the diagonal for the light squared bishop. So, a good continuation. But in the game, he went with d5, and I could push the pawn forward or I could take. Actually, the chess engine prefers taking slightly. So if you take, queen takes back. Let's see. I think is that the line I looked at? Yeah, bishop e2. Bishop e2. You know, the more natural move here, I guess, would be knight to c3, kicking the queen again, and that's a good move too. But bishop e2. Also, the chess engine was saying even h3 was a move there, but there's a little bit of concern about the knight on f3 because this bishop can come out to g5, and the queen and the bishop are coordinating on that f3 square. So a good, sensible move. And then, yeah, the rest of this is a chess engine line. The chess engine likes knight c6 here, which makes sense, putting pressure on that pawn. c4, kicking the queen back. Queen drops back, and now he's still attacking this d-pawn. The queen couldn't take because it was defended by the knight, but it's still under attack. So d5, knight e5, and it looks like this is a pretty good position for white. But black has got a little something here. He's got this open diagonal now for the dark squared bishop, so black will have to play carefully to white will play with respect for that diagonal, but white has a lot of space and easy development for his pieces, so white should be better there. Anyway, I went with e5. That was the other choice there. Yeah, e5. And he played e6, so he didn't go with c5, which is the book move. So after this, we're just out of the book. And c5 makes sense, by the way. It's kind of consistent with the plan of putting the bishop here. You want to kind of undermine these pawns which have occupied the dark squares, and you can take advantage of the bishop's position there. Anyway, he went e6, so just sort of conceding this pawn structure. I went to bishop e2, which is not a bad move, but the chess engine is already indicating that h4 can be played, and just go for that quick attack. You know, he's committed to the king side. He's limited in space. He can't put a knight on the f6 square, for example. So it looks like there's a situation where he can just go directly for the attack, even before he's castled. So interesting. Bishop e2 is still a good move. Let's see, he went knight e7. I castled. He played a6. I guess he's building up to something on the queen side, and also he doesn't want my bishop coming out here to the b5 square. So I play with c4, just put a little more pressure on the center there, and he goes c6. So he's got this perfect pawn structure, everything on light squares. And in fact, you could even kind of seal him in here with the move c5. This is one of the top choices of the chess engine. Let's see, he might develop his pieces like this and hope for a pawn break here or a pawn break here at some point. But anyway, this looks like black is being smothered, and that's a fine way to play. I chose to play with one open line. I like to get a little more space in these positions, some open lines that I can attack along and stuff. But this helps black in a little, in some ways. It does free up his position a little bit and give him some more squares for his pieces. So technically c5 is probably the better move. Anyway, he went, oh, it's my turn. I went knight c3. Still, white's got a nice advantage here. He goes bishop d7, go bishop g5, starting to take advantage of his dark squared weaknesses. He castled, and queen d2, and he went f6. So I think this is not a move that black wants to play, but it's necessary in this position. You know, I just have too much of a bind, so he needs to try and open it up somehow. I take and he takes. The reason why, well, let's go ahead and do a couple more exchanges and we'll talk about this. The reason why it's not not a move that black wants to play is it leaves him with this backwards e-pawn that gives me a target to play against, and I have a nice one pawn holding back two pawns situation in the center, so it's good for white. So all through this part of the game, yeah, and up, let's see, we're on move 13, yeah, and up to move 17, I keep a nice advantage. So let's see, I play rook a to c1, that's pretty logical. He goes knight to f5. He is starting to organize his forces to put pressure on my d-pawn, so that's interesting. h3 is a weak move. h3 I was building up to g4, but if I want to play g4, I could actually just play it right away. I don't need to throw in h3, so that was kind of a wasted tempo. The chess engine wants to play like this. It wants to play with bishop d3. So he goes knight c6, going after that pawn. Just trade off one of the knights. So he takes with the rook, and then play knight a4 and get the knight to this good-looking c5 square, which is, I thought about that move during the game, but I didn't get it in. So h3 was the first weak move, although I still have an advantage after this. Let's see, he goes knight c6. I go g4 now, kicking his knight away so that I don't have to worry about the increasing pressure on my d-pawn. His knight drops back to e7. And now I go knight g5. And after this is kind of the turning point of the game. After this, black is better. So what should I have done instead? Well, the move recommended by the chess engine is this knight a4 move, which, as I said, I thought about during the game. After knight g5, he immediately played b5, and I never get in knight a4. So this is this kind of situation where you have you know, a couple of maneuvers in mind, but you know, the idea of bringing this knight here and this knight here is so they both pile up on the e6 pawn, and I did knight g5, the most direct way of approaching it, but then he can seal off the other knight, whereas if I move this knight first, it's not so easy for him to prevent knight g5. That's something I can probably throw in anyway. I mean, he can't even play h6 at this point. I can just take the pawn. So it looks like I have that square available to me for the next few moves anyway. So if I want to maneuver my knights, I should start with the queenside knight. It's the one who can have his path taken away. So anyway, that's the origin of this knight g5 blunder, and he plays well here. He takes advantage of that, takes away my path, and I went with f4 here, and this is compounding my mistake. This pawn on f4 is a big weakness, and in fact, in this position, the chess engine wants me to move my knight back to f3. It thinks that's the best move. So you know, a move like knight g5 is a big mistake if on the very next move the chess engine says you should put the piece back where it came from. But yeah, that move on that knight on f3 was doing an important job. Let's see, I got in f4. He went queen b6, and now we see the job that the knight on f3 was doing. It was defending the d pawn, and he still had ways to bring pressure against it. I got a little too relaxed about that. So I dropped the knight back here, which seems necessary, and then he went rook to c8. If he went immediately to f8, just bring this rook across and put pressure on the pawn, I can't even defend that pawn. Let's see. The chess engine says I should play something like king g2. He takes, and then rook c to d1 to defend the d pawn. And he's just won a pawn, and he's got pressure on my center. So that would be the best way for black to continue, and that's the reason why this knight g5 and f4 turned the tide of the game. So black is better here. Even after rook c8, he's still keeping some kind of advantage, but it's not as good. Let's see, I go king h2 now. There's this uncomfortable pin along this diagonal, and I want to have the d pawn free to be able to take on e5. So king h2 was an important tempo move that was allowed by rook c8. So for example, the other line, if he played rook a to f8, I could have tried a trick like I played in the game, putting the pawn forward to e5. Now if he takes, I can't take with the d pawn, but I probably want to take with the f pawn anyway. And then he can exchange, and then he can play knight to c6. And because of this pin, this d pawn is under attack. And let's see, rook to the e pawn is under attack as well as the d pawn. I play rook to d1 to defend the d pawn here, and he can just take the e pawn. So I'm losing a pawn in that line too. So that's the importance of this lost tempo. Where after I went back with my knight to f3, he went rook to c8 first, and I moved my king to unpin, and then he brought his rook over to double up on the pawn. So now I can play knight e5, and I do. He takes, I take. He takes, oh, he didn't take. He could have kept taking, just to compare it with the other line. If he takes here, I take back, and he plays knight c6. I can play rook d1, and this pawn is defended, and this pawn is defended. There's no longer the pin. So that's why everything's kind of hanging together in this line. Let's see. He didn't go for the exchange. He went for the check, rook f2 check. And so after this exchange of mistakes, we're now in a range where the game is pretty much even. Let's see. I go king g3. In fact, I even start to, as I get my pieces organized, White's position gradually improves, and I managed to get some kind of advantage again here. So let's see, he dropped his rook back to f7, bring my bishop to f3, he went to queen d8, knight e2, just bring my pieces over to the king side, trying to get organized here and also open up the c file for my rook. Maybe it can come in here to c7, at least keep that possibility. Let's see, he brought his queen over to f8, putting pressure here along the f file again. So I brought my rook back to defend. I gave up on the c file and decided I needed to defend over here. So he played king g7, I went knight f4, and he went knight c6. Taking a look at the center again, but I'm still holding on to that. I went rook f2. I wanted the rook in a square where it was well defended so that these pieces didn't get pinned. There's this kind of threat I was worried about of pushing the pawn forward and opening up this file suddenly. Although because of his king on g7 is actually a bit of a target, and that saves me in some lines. So king g7 was actually a mistake when he moved that king up there. Let's see. He played a5 here, and here I spotted this tactic where I take a pawn and push a pawn forward, and actually that is not such a great tactic, although maybe the reason is not so easy to see. But let's take a look at a couple other lines here. The chess engine wants to play bishop e2, and I was kind of worried about this. I was worried about this idea of just pushing that pawn to g5, but actually g5 is a mistake here, because then I can go to h5 with check, and then I can trade off, let's see, put the king on h8. It doesn't matter too much. Trade off, and then I can drop the knight into f6. And this is a good position for White. I mean, the material is even, but I've got this dominating knight near his king, and I can pile up along this diagonal. And the chess engine, I mean, both the bishop and the queen can get onto that diagonal. So the chess engine rates this as a win for White. So after bishop e2, he shouldn't go g5. That would just be a mistake. He should play something like queen b4, going for some counterplay. Say queen takes, knight takes. But it looks like I can pick up a pawn here, kick the knight back. So he goes back to c6 and grab the b pawn. And it looks like White has some edge. So I've developed some kind of advantage here at this point, and then I kind of give it away with this tactic. But it looks like an interesting tactic, and your opponent can always make mistakes like mine did. But let's see why it didn't work. Let's see, he took, and I push forward. That was the idea, and I'd been thinking about that for a while. You know, when you have these advanced pawns, it's an interesting sacrifice to sacrifice here so that you can push a pawn forward. In this case, the pawn is supported by the knight, so it looks like an effective fork. But, well, he had some ways to play. So the game went bishop takes, knight takes, which is a fork of the king and the queen, so he resigned. He didn't take time to try and figure out the best reply here. But he could have tried rook takes f4. And this is a better move than it seems. I thought I would just take the rook, the queen moves, then I take the bishop, and I've won the exchange. I thought that would be good for me. But in fact, taking with the rook is a mistake because he moves his queen with a pin. So I can go ahead and grab the bishop, but then he can play this g5 move and take advantage of the pin. And black's a little better. Let's see, I'll get some pawns, and I will get some pressure on his exposed king, but black has an extra piece, so black's a little better. The game, it's not immediately over, but black definitely has the advantage there. So the best reply here after rook takes f4 is to take with the queen. That eliminates any possibilities of pins along this diagonal. But well, he can trade, and after the trade he can take this pawn, and we get the situation where the pawns are even, they're even symmetrical. It's just a pure case of a rook versus a bishop and a knight in an endgame. And well, the chess engine rates this as slightly better for black. Usually the two pieces are more valuable than the rook, but it's not always the case. I mean, as the position opens up, the rook becomes stronger. It can hit targets at a great distance, whereas the bishop is limited to working on the light squares and the knight is limited to working in a local area. So it's still a game at this point. The advantage towards black by the chess engine was something like half a pawn. Anyway, oh yeah, the chess engine said, I took with the rook automatically. The chess engine said it was better to take with the king. Yeah, you get this kind of position. But the general comments I was making still apply. I guess the rook is maybe a little more mobile around here. It has ideas of putting pressure on the knight and coming in here to this square. So anyway, would have been a long endgame, which could have gone either way, I guess, or could have ended in a draw. But after he played bishop takes e6, which is what I was sort of hoping for, I was able to get in the nice little fork there, and he resigned. So interesting game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Leave any comments you have in the section below, and I'll see you again soon.